Today, our conversation is focused on cybersecurity as presented with support from AT&T. AT&T is represented here today by many of their associates. And now, won't you please help me welcome them and welcome Nicole Walker, Director of the External Affairs of AT&T Ohio, to the podium to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmett. AT&T is proud to support the Columbus Metropolitan Club, and we're proud to support their mission, which is to engage the community in conversations that are important to our citizens, our leaders, and the overall quality of our region and to the state of Ohio. Today's topic, cybersecurity, is an issue for any of us who use digital devices, whether we're using it to share photos or to do social media or to even keep in touch with our friends and family. Cyberspace can be a potentially wonderful or dangerous landscape. Today's speakers are dealing with security and privacy challenges of this remarkable and vast landscape every day. Please help me welcome our speakers. From your left, it will be Greg Shannon, Chief Scientist for CERT Division, Carnegie Mellon University, Software Engineering Institute. Then we have Kirk Hareth, VP and Associate General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer for Nationwide Insurance Companies. We'll also have Corey Collins, Special Agent for the FBI. And please be aware that Corey is going to be seated off camera today for security reasons, so you will not exactly see him. He'll just be sitting right here. So he's here, you just won't be able to see him. And leading the conversation is Padma Sastry. She is the Senior Program Manager for Nationwide Insurance. And with that, Padma, the podium is yours, but let's please welcome our speakers for today.
Thank you, Nicole. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see a good crowd here. As always, it's a great pleasure for me to be hosting another good forum on a topic that's so exciting. Today's topic, big data and cybersecurity, is a very interesting one, a contentious one, and one that holds a lot of uncertainty and one that holds a lot of questions for the public and corporations and the government and the like. So today, I'm going to drive the conversation amongst three of our distinguished panelists, Kirk Hareth and Greg Shannon and Agent Collins, in looking at some of the issues that surround cybersecurity, what we're doing about it, and how do we go about addressing the challenges in the future. So before I go into the actual conversation, let me start with some personal accounts and some stories. The first one is a personal one. In the last maybe 2 to 3 years, I have had at least 3 letters, ominous ones, from companies that told me that my data, my personal data, like my social security number, my date of birth, has been breached. And I'm sure all of you guys probably share my same story, right? On the next level, on a local level, imagine a small town somewhere in the East Coast, and this is a small ice cream parlor, a small convenience store with a card reader, possibly an ATM. And soon, about a couple months later, this small town, maybe 20,000 people in there, a lot of them find out that their money is being siphoned off somewhere. They're just seeing bills on their credit card account, only to find out when they trace it back, this is being scammed by someone in Texas. So that's at a local level. So now at a national level, and all of us here have been recently been reading the news of the Office of Personnel Management having a massive data breach early in June. And the agency is coming up with new news about the data breach. Over maybe 18 million people affected on their personal records. And lately, the news has always also been other data other than their personal records. So, allegedly, China is involved in this whole thing, so it crosses the global borders. And the investigation is still going on. Now, on a lighter side, in 2013, I believe, President Putin went as far as to go into Back into the Future kind of thing and ordered all the top security communications to be done via paper through typewriters. And forbid anyone to be doing any communications over computers. Now, this is a little high on the silliness scale, but nevertheless, that's the truth, right? And China has just announced this morning, top news, that they have tightened their security controls because even they're worried about their security breaches. So the stories are endless, and we see them every day. And in 2014, about 20 large companies told us about large, massive data breaches. Target, eBay, Home Depot, JP Morgan Chase, right? So the crimes are being committed non-discriminatory way. It could be a small business, it could be personal, it could be a large business. Now, the question now that we have to look at ourselves is, are we vulnerable and exposed? When do we get to a point where we feel comfortable with our cybersecurity controls? And are we spending enough? Are we spending too much money on this? Is our money worth it? Is cybersecurity an oxymoron? So there's a million questions. And I'm sure we can't get through all of them, but we'll try to see if we can get through some of the very key questions we as public, corporations, and government can sift through. Having said that, let me start my first question to Kirk. And Kirk, you, as a Chief Privacy Officer of Nationwide Insurance, one of the biggest insurance companies in the country, from a corporation perspective, and as a holder of people's data, nationwide, and possibly similar companies, can you tell us more about the thresholds that these companies have? Because you, as a company, hold personal data of millions of people, and how do you make this data secure? And how safe is our personal data?
And I have a minute and a half to answer that, right? All right. Well, there are legal standards that we all have to abide by in the financial services industry. In fact, the financial services industry, in addition to healthcare, are really the only ones that have what I would call hard and fast legal frameworks that they have to abide by for privacy and security. It's a reasonableness standard, so perfection is not technically the kind of the bar, but the regulators and trial lawyers are continually trying to drive all of us to a perfectionistic standard, which is, at the end of the day, it's an impossibility. We also have contractual obligations with our customers, both personal and also, most importantly, like pension plan administrators and state and local government retirement deferred compensation plans were one of the biggest providers of those. So we have contractual obligations written into our contracts around the types of security that we have to maintain, right? And again, it's an evolving threshold. So what was secure when I started this role 15 years ago? What was secure then and what is secure now are entirely different, and we can talk about that. And every new technology advancement, right? The bar gets higher. So encryption is a perfect example. 15 years ago, outside of the military and military-related industries, few people were encrypting anything, and then it became, and there's an interoperability issue which we can't get into today either. And then, about in the early 2000s, right, you had secure transmission over the internet. That became sort of doable. It was practical. It was scalable. It was cost effective. So the standard changed. And then everybody was losing or getting laptops stolen. Remember that in the mid 2000s? I called those the laptop wars, 4, 5, 6, right? And everybody ran around. And if you don't encrypt your corporate laptops today, you are unreasonable. I will tell you that. So we all encrypted because, again, it became interoperable, it became efficient, it became scalable and cost effective. Websites, same thing. Now we're kind of in a race for what's called encryption at rest, which again, there's fantastic. My colleague here can talk about that. Fantastic technological issues around interoperability, particularly for complex networks. And so we're also, and then coupled with that, what we call access control or authentication standards are elevated, right? Password and ID are dead, right? We've all had them stolen hundreds of times at this point. So we're trying to think about multi-factor authentication. It used to be a little key fob. Now we're actually fingerprinting your device. So your device actually has a little fingerprint on it that says, this is Kirk Harris' device, and Nationwide authenticates me in. And Padma works there too. So her device says if one of your devices tries to get into Nationwide, it will not let you in. And so we're trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys who, frankly, in an asymmetric way, are, I don't know if they're smarter, but they have more time to think about it, and they have more resources to attack us. So I'll leave it at that.
Anything you, Corey or Greg, want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just make the comment that the threat has been changing over the last couple of decades. As the internet and network systems have embodied more value, they've become a more attractive target, and I think that's part of what changed. 20 years ago, what you had in a data center wasn't really that interesting and wasn't easily exploited by an adversary, and that's part of what's changing today, and what will continue to be an issue, as the internet becomes more and more valuable, as you find more value in your mobile phones and the Internet of Things and such.
Kirk brought up an interesting point actually with the password being dead. If you look at like the OPM breach, a lot of people are afraid that their credit card or their social security numbers were stolen, their addresses, but not only on top of that, their secondary security questions were potentially also stolen. So think of all your accounts you create online. Think of your bank account. Give me your first car, your best friend's first name, the street you grew up on. OPM has all that data. I supplied a good chunk of that data when I was signing up, to take on government service. The stuff to think about in these data breaches is, what else have the bad guys stolen, and what else can they use to access my accounts, and how do I protect myself against those threats?
So segueing to the next question, Corey, with respect to government agencies, specifically the enforcement agencies as FBI and the police force, et cetera, how can you tell us, the public, how are you enforcing, through what tools and instruments? I know you can't tell us all, but what we can know, right. To let us know what are are we giving the message to the cyber criminals about the repercussions they're going to have, and are we sure that they're getting the message? How do you guys go about doing that?
That's actually an extremely difficult question. We're doing the best we can. We've evolved a ton in the last few years. FBI, Secret Service, DHS, local police departments in investigating these cyber type crimes. The hardest part is the bad guy, and this is still where law enforcement struggles, is the bad guy isn't sitting in the same city or isn't sitting in the same state or even the same country as where the data they're stealing is. So how do we combat that? How do we find these bad guys? How do we arrest them? How do we send a message to stop other people from committing the same crimes? We've had a lot of success recently with one case, one botnet or malware case, where bad guys in Russia actually all over the world, stole a lot of money. And if you look on the State Department and the FBI's most wanted list, you'll see a Russian citizen on there with a $3 million reward, with the hopes that someone will take them, turn them in, and collect that reward, and then we can see prosecute them on the U.S. side of things. Other than that, it's trying to identify what facilities the bad guys are using, trying to shut them down, trying to prevent with our partners like DHS, and doing the best we can.
So are there actual laws and such enforcement kind of policies that is known to the public? If you commit a crime, if you go commit a crime, we know what, there's a prison, there's this, that. Can you talk about what kind of repercussions that these criminals face?
There are laws. The main statute we kind of look at on the FBI or the federal side is U.S. Code 1030, and then 2C is what I look at, which is unauthorized access. So someone breaking into a computer system. Mm-hmm. The hardest part right now with that is criminals who do violate this, they're not getting a lot of jail time because it's a very nonviolent crime. I guess the easiest way to look at it would be, say you're a bank robber and you rob a bank. You have to get up out of bed. You have to maybe get a gun. You have to actually go into the bank, hope there's no law enforcement or undercover police officer inside the bank, and then rob the bank. What sort of time do you think you'd get for robbing a bank? Maybe the minimum, I think, with a firearm is about 7 years. We have these cyber criminals who get out of bed, probably don't get dressed, start up their computer, run their software to do whatever they do, steal banking credentials, and then steal $4 million. What sort of time do they get? Who knows? A lot of that hasn't been tried, but in a lot of the cases, very little, maybe a year, maybe 6 months. And it's just a matter of, getting our laws there saying, hey, these are very serious crimes because bad guys are stealing a lot of money. One hammer we do have, which is identity theft, is a 2-year mandatory minimum. But if we charge that or don't charge that, that's for the prosecutors to decide. We just investigate it.
Okay, now to Greg here. So my question to you, Greg, as the chief scientist that does the stuff, the protocols, the standards, and what have you, what in the area of cybersecurity concerning research, tell us more about the technologies that are evolving by the day, and what are we doing from a technology, tools, and that sort of perspective? I know we touched upon it a little bit with multi-factor authentication and so on, but tell us more about a hacker perspective. I mean, if I were a hacker, and what kind of technologies are they looking, or lack thereof, to be, so we're aware that we don't go that path.
You mean to prevent being a hacker or to thwart hackers?
I mean, to both. From Agent Collins' perspective, to be able to catch hold of the hacker.
So let me talk about a couple of different things. One is attribution is a real challenge. Going to Corey's comments about tracking adversaries down and people who are breaking the law. That's one of the real technical challenges. I believe it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago, President Obama mentioned in one of his State of the Union addresses the need for attribution. And most of you probably don't remember that, but for me in the field, it's like, yes, that's really a key technical challenge. And that is really, in terms of how the internet is engineered and how things are put together, being able to trace it back so you can say, here's where we want to prevent someone from doing something or go after them with law or diplomatic means and such. Another is that there's a lot of research that's been done over the decades that is actually now becoming relevant. Papers from 20, 30 years ago, people going back and reading say, oh, now I understand why I should be doing this. In the past, I didn't have something that was valuable enough to really worry about applying these techniques, and we can apply them. And then in terms of state of the art, there's some really neat work that's being done in terms of combining security and privacy. There's some venues where people try and pit those two ideas against each other, but really security and privacy go hand in hand. Two-factor authentication is one of those where you're protecting your privacy, you're protecting your security by using two-factor authentication. And I encourage you all to use this on your bank accounts and your email accounts and such. But then there's also new technologies. There's a paper by Google that came out this year which showed how to make it so that your browser information, they want to understand what browsers around the world are configured like. And they need to do that for to optimize your experience, to make the browsers more efficient, to give you a better value for this free browser that they're giving you. But they don't want others, whether it's governments, criminals, to be able to track your browser. And actually, they don't care about your browser, they care about the population of browsers. So they've developed techniques that use encryption, that use some randomization techniques and kind of creative ways to lie, to communicate information back to them so they can understand what the population of browsers around the world looks like and how it's behaving, how people have them configured, what language they're using, and so on. But adversaries can't actually track any individual browser, and that is both a security and a privacy contribution. So people are starting to, the researchers are thinking more and more creatively, but also there's a great body of work that now is actually coming into view that, this is relevant and this should be acted on.
So in your thoughts, in each of your individual thoughts, how do you think the people are reacting to this? How do you see, it's probably a question that Kirk can really address.
Well, I think it's interesting that in 2015 there's a lot of hullabaloo about something that we've been fighting for over 15 years. I have had a really good, Corey and I have, I've known him. We've worked with the FBI on some cases. Goes back before Corey, one of his colleagues. We've had a relationship with the FBI since 2004 or 5. That the FBI is your friend in this space. Because at the end of the day, what we're all looking for is information. And there are some bills in Congress, and I'm very hopeful that this year they might actually get through the partisan maelstrom and get passed and signed. I think most of the particulars have been worked out on both sides, and now it's just a timing issue. But information is key, because all of us in this room are being attacked every day. We all see it, but we all see a section. It's like if you're looking at a multicolored beach ball and you're looking at the green side and you're asked what color is it, and it's green, right? Greg here is looking at a side that's white. Padma's looking at a side that's blue. Corey's looking at one that's orange, right? So unless we all talk to each other and we share information, we actually don't really know what color the beach ball is. And it's the same thing with this space. The bad guys share data endlessly. And I am forced to ask Corey for a subpoena if he simply asks me, have you seen this IP address hit your firewall logs? I can't just hand that over to him without a subpoena or some other exception, and there aren't a whole lot of them. And it's, it's like the old pogo adage, and I've met the enemy, and it's us, right? So we all want faster, easier to use technology, right? And just like with automobiles, right? Speed kills, because we aren't architected today to be secure. We're architected for ease of use, comfort, speed. We don't even care about the technology. We just want to hit the app, and it tells us, where we are and how much time we got till we get there. But it's kicking off data, and it's letting data in, and inherently we are not secure. And so we almost have to step back culturally and say, what's important, right? We can, as Padma says, we can continue to get breach notification letters till the cows come home. And the FBI can continue to chase ghosts, which is what they do. And or we can all get serious about this, and we could begin to demand from technology manufacturers, software manufacturers, that the technology that they're providing us in our homes and our businesses and our cars and our washing machines and our refrigerators and everything now that is connected is inherently secure. Now, there's always going to be some holes. Greg can speak to the technology quite better than me. There's always a way to break everything, right? But it shouldn't be so bloody easy that a 17-year-old with 11 years of college could go out and get just hacker tools and break into any of our homes through our computers and our video systems and everything else. Someday look at, if those of you who have business, look at the software licenses that you've bought, right? Software manufacturers will not actually tell you that the stuff will even work, let alone be secure, right? There's something wrong with that, right? We don't get into cars that have caveated the heck out of them that says that when you go onto the highway, your tires are going to fall off and your car is going to blow up, right? None of us would get in the thing. We wouldn't pay money for that. But every day we click on stuff that we don't even read. You just go, yeah, okay, I agree, right? I mean, I do it. I'm not saying that I'm different than anybody else. We all do it. We got stuff to do. Let's get on with it, right? But it's a cultural thing. It's a technology thing. The law is decades behind where we are, where the risk is.
So let me ask Greg another question do you think we have reached some kind of a threshold with the technology? Where are we going? Are we going, as we go from paperless to digital, are we going now from passwords to retinal scans and thumbprints, digital thumbprints, whatever the newest? And it's actually a good question for Corey too. I mean, where are we going with the law enforcement and how are we going to detect them?
So let me just kind of frame things out how I've characterized things to colleagues that are non-technical. 10 years ago, the internet was recognized as something important and good and creates innovation and should be encouraged. And yes, there's some security and privacy challenges, but that's their problem. Today, it's the recognition that the internet is connected to everything. Okay, and so those security and privacy challenges are still there. 10 years from now, with the Internet of Things, where there's going to be 1 or 2 or 3 orders of magnitude more objects out there and more data, now the internet will be everything. So we're part of this continuing dynamic. So it's actually going to get a little worse before it gets better. But it took us 45 years to get here. And a big question for society is what's the balance about convenience, about security? These are discussions that as a society we've had about pollution, that we've had about car safety, about medical ethics, Every industry goes through these. So, you're living in a wonderful time. You're setting the decisions you make, whether it's at the polls or in your companies, are going to affect the future of your grandchildren about how they experience the internet and how they experience this new internet technology as it evolves over the coming decades. So it's really actually pretty exciting, I think, time to know that you can have that sort of influence and impact going forward. But it's going to be some hard questions.
So Corey, your thoughts?
On the law enforcement side, and Kirk said it perfectly, is the biggest challenge for us is getting the data. The law enforcement side, we're not the ones being attacked. Your companies are the ones being attacked. And we don't have good visibility without the sharing of, this is what the bad guys are using. This is how they're attacking us. This is how they're attempting to steal our information, successful or unsuccessful. We're missing a lot of that data because just that sharing isn't there right now. There's some companies or some organizations who do share a lot of that with us, but other ones who don't. And without a good picture and a good way to crunch all that data, it makes our job incredibly challenging. I'm hoping it'll move forward, and we'll have better information sharing in the future. Maybe if the new legislation passes, we'll get lucky. But it's just a matter of knowing what's out there. I think a lot of companies are afraid that if they do share it, that they may get in trouble for not adequately protecting their data, which is a general fear. But on the law enforcement side, I can tell you there's no federal statute that I investigate that deals with not securing your data properly. We're there to catch the bad guys. We're not there to get you in trouble. The downside is there are regulation agencies that if our stuff does hit the court system later on, they could see that and then it could come out. I know Nationwide had some dealings with that side of the house when they reported their data breach a few years ago. And hopefully that gets better too, because just again to echo what Kirk said, a lot of our problems are in software design. It's the our software is not secure, and companies unfortunately are falling victim to that and losing a lot of our personal data. I think it needs to start from the software development side of things, and a lot more time needs to be spent focused on security there. I was a software developer beforehand, and it's funny as our big push was connect everything to the internet. You want to see what your machine's doing at XYZ amount of time, how many widgets you produced, and now it's like, man, why did I give that advice? But you live and learn, I guess. You get smarter in the different roles you're in.
Now for the $1 million question, no pun intended, but are we spending too much from a corporate perspective, from a government perspective, and from a consumer perspective?
So I've been asked that as senior management has asked that, right? We could spend our entire, $1.5 billion IT budget on security, and we would still not be able to be 100% sure that we would be secure. You're never going to be 100% secure. So you have to find that, again, it's back to that calibrating with your IT experts and your lawyers. What's that sweet spot, right? I call it like staying with, I try to use analogies, but it's you're a water buffalo. And if you're running by a bunch of lions, you try to stay in the middle of the pack or out ahead of the pack. And that's sort of what this is. You don't want to be so far ahead that the next lion up above gets you. You want to be sort of within the best practices sort of, sweet spot's 50% to about 80%, right? You want to be somewhere in there. You don't want to spend so much money that you're a spendthrift, and you don't want to spending so little money that the lion pack takes you out very easily. So you can make it harder, but you can't actually ever be perfect. And it's more important to try to figure out once they get in, how can you make sure that what they're stealing is either useless to them or you're catching them before they get out, right? And it's a lot like, in a way, it's a lot like the old castles and fortifications were built in the medieval times, right? They were assumed that the gate was going to be breached. There were more gates behind it. There were archery towers to kill the guys who got through the first gate. If those towers went down, there were other towers that took those towers out. And it's very similar in this respect. But there is no perfection. Try to stay with whatever your industry is. Try to stay in the middle of the pack. And then from a legal perspective, I believe you'll be reasonable, and that reasonableness is really it's the middle of the pack.
Corey, what about
I'll answer it two ways. First, on the corporate side, we go out to a lot of companies. We do a lot of victim notifications, unfortunately. Some people look at us as the budget enhancer, because once we do the victim notification, their budget magically goes up. But you do see companies of all walks of life, different sizes, spending different amounts of money. And unfortunately, sometimes I walk in and I shake my head and I'm like, you guys, I can't tell them to spend more money, but I'm like, you really should, think about this, because, one person in your IT security of a, Fortune 1000, so to speak, company, is not enough. On the government side of things, and this is my recruitment pitch, we don't have enough trained people. We don't have enough people in the cyber investigative or defense realm on the government side to investigate this threat the best we can. So if you know anyone who's interested in, the FBI or cyber or Secret Service, we are constantly recruiting cyber agents. If they think it would be cool, FBIjobs.gov, there's kind of just a rotational post. So that's my recruitment pitch. If you have anyone who has a computer background who would be interested. I never thought I'd be here, and have this job, and I just applied online and got it, and they can do the same thing.
What about the academic side of the house?
So actually, let me just push back a little bit on some of your analogies. One of the dangers in cyber is the reliance on physical security analogies, because our adversaries have shown us time and time again that those analogies lead us to assumptions that they will then exploit. So the notion of running in the middle of the pack works great when you have kind of a sense of physical, spatial constraints that an adversary has to deal with. But in cyber, as mentioned, you can jump from one country to another, from your bed to create problems, to wreak havoc elsewhere. So I'd actually point you to the National Institute of Standards. They have something called the Cyber Risk Management Framework. And this is actually a great way for any individual, any company, small company, big company, to get an initial cut at where do they need to focus. And step one is always, what's most important to you? And that's a question we can each ask and say, what's most important to you that someone from an internet access might be able to disrupt for you, and what are you going to do to mitigate that? And that's how you can answer the question about whether or not you're spending enough or too much money. Certainly as a taxpayer, I'd like us to spend a lot less, as little as possible. And that really gets at the research challenge of how do we make security more efficient, so that, lots of these, hopefully in 10 or 20 or 30 years, many of these things that you worry about today, you won't have to be worried about. They will be embedded in the technology, and the technologists will have found solutions for us. But until then, it's going to be challenging.
So what you just saw here was this is the constant battle between the IT and the legal. I told you the legal defense, right? If the first thing that you're going to have to prove in a court or to a regulator is that you were reasonable, and reasonable is what's everybody else doing, right? If you aren't doing what everybody else is doing, then you're dead. You're dead, right? You're beyond negligent, right? You're reckless, and so. But this is a constant. I mean, I've been working with IT folks now for 15 years, and I've probably become more, I'm more flexible than I used to be. But at the end of the day, there is a point to where too much is stupid, as far as spending, because it's not going to buy you. It's going to buy you a fraction of risk reduction for multi-millions more. And at a certain point, you've got to be. You're never going to be perfect.
The enterprise has to decide what its risk tolerance is.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. In a few minutes, we move to the audience questions, but allow me to share my one final thought before we move to the final questions. And it has undoubtedly been a very exciting half hour, lots of questions, lots of information. I do want to leave with one final thought before we close, and that is, in an increasingly digital world that we live in right now, where we have PCs, tablets, computers, and even watches, right? And we're going paperless as we speak. We're also getting more and more cognizant, more and more aware of all the looming threats that's before us. From a personal, local, global, universal point, perspective, I just want to think about what and how does a utopian world of a cyber secure atmosphere look like? With that, I will open the podium for questions. And before I do that, I'm going to read one of our CMC's ground rule, which is CMC's tradition to take audience questions. Please step to the microphone over there give us your name and ask your question. And thank you in advance for not making long editorial comments.
My name is Warren Fishman. I have a question for all three of you, I guess. How careful are we about who gets our information? I recently had two experiences. One of them was, as many people in the room probably know, that the state of Ohio has lost tons of money because people are applying for other people's refunds. Now, I didn't get a refund. I didn't have one coming, but I got a letter saying that I had to complete a survey by telephone to have them process my state tax form. I called the number, and after several tries, I got a nice young man who worked for an independent company, and I think, I'm not sure, but I think he was a temp because I got friendly with him after I passed the survey, and he was a temp, and he knew. They asked questions like, what was my grandmother's maiden name on my mother's side? He knew the answer. I didn't. I got lucky and guessed, okay? And he asked me what kind of car I had in 1986, and when did I sell it? And I had sold a building in 1992, and what was the name of the person? It was multiple choice, luckily. And I knew it was a guy because the other two, and so I guessed it because the other two were women. So as I talked to him, he said he worked for an independent company. He got this job. He was really lucky to get it, and it's probably pretty temporary. He's got more information about me than I do. Okay, so what are we doing as far as protection for just letting our information out there? Obviously, he probably got the information. The company got the information from the Franklin County site and transfers and so on, but what are we doing to protect that?
There's technology's evolving, but really I think it's primarily legal protections right now to control how it's being used. I mean, that's one case, you cite one case where there's some information, but if you think about what you do on the internet, if you go to any popular website and you click a link, on say a news article that you want to read, there's typically 400 to 500 companies that receive information that you've clicked that link that they'll be using as part of their marketing and targeting and tracking information. So part of it is the deal with the devil we've made in some sense in terms of access to information, that companies can design great products for us with us out really having to tell them what we want. So it's, like I said earlier, it's this conversation in the society, in the culture about what really are the trade-offs. And are we going to allow that from a legal point of view?
You were probably dealing with the information that they had was probably from one of the big three consumer reporting agencies, and that's sort of it's a form of multi-factor authentication that we call it out-of-wallet authentication. So they want to make sure that these questions are so tough and personal to you that the random crook could not possibly know what title you transferred in 1992.
But the random temp can.
But the random temp, the random temp's got it right there on his or her computer. I mean, they pull you up with your social security number, and then there's a whole bunch of questions that cars you used to own and houses you used to own, and it's all public information. It is. I mean, they suck up all of the county information. They suck up your credit card transactions and your land purchases, and so it's all there. It is highly regulated. I mean, I can tell you that, and generally those companies are secure to the extent that the temps aren't actually using it and writing it down and stealing from you. So,
You have anything to add?
It's just the insider threat issue that's always relevant. I mean, you could always have an insider stealing your info just the same way an outsider can steal all your info. So,
Next question.
Hi, Melissa Fisher. My question for you is anybody working the other side of this problem? So years ago, I don't know if it's still true, you could open a phone account with one social security number. I just heard on 60 Minutes last weekend that you can file for a tax tax refund with just a social security number that doesn't even necessarily have to match the name. There was one other piece of information that I forget. So is anybody working on at least making the things that could lead to financial damage? I don't care as much if somebody steals my American Airlines miles, but if somebody gets into my bank account, is anybody working on better technology to protect those things that could really do harm?
The two-factor authentication really is your best defense today. But yeah, being able to control how information gets used and the notion that it can only be used by certain individuals in certain locations is part of the research landscape. But unfortunately, we don't have a great answer for you today.
Yeah. Like I said, we've architected our culture, particularly around financial transactions, to being able to go to Best Buy on a Saturday before the big game and buy the 80-inch TV on, same as cash. And so we want that ease, we want the quickness. Most companies today are using, for instance, it usually, for our bank, you have to have 5 pieces of information to open an account. And for every one that we drop off, we get more fraudulent. You can just see a statistical increase. You go to 4, you've got more fraudulent accounts. You go to 3, more. And so, yeah, so I think everybody's thinking about it. And I've heard that, I've heard good things out of the IRS and particularly out of the Ohio tax, that they are strengthening the authentication around these returns. So again, I think it depends on how painful it is. Businesses probably are the first to, particularly highly regulated businesses. Government probably is at the end because they don't really react until we start to scream really loud.
Corey?
I don't have anything on that one, sorry.
Okay, maybe we can go to the next question.
Hi, I'm Dennis Hirsch. I'm with Porter Wright, Morrison Arthur, and I also teach privacy law at Capital Law School here in town. I know the title of our event today is Big Data Cybersecurity, and I wanted to ask about the big data and data analytics side of this. And my understanding is that big data and data analytics create more cybersecurity vulnerabilities, perhaps because data sets are more varied and so harder to secure, and that big data can also lead to better strategies for reducing cybersecurity risk by spotting abnormalities and that type of thing. And I'd just be interested in the panel's comments on both the increased risk that big data creates for cybersecurity and the ways in which big data can help us to reduce that risk.
One of the biggest challenges with big data increasing the risks is that there's usually information and data that nobody recognizes is there until you get a big pile of it. The owners of the data, the individuals with their individual data, once you start seeing certain types of correlations of behavior and such, you can make inferences that can be unusual, can be unnerving. There's the case, a number of years ago where, the Target ad was arriving at someone's home to announce, the arrival of a new member of the family, and the dad didn't know, or the grandfather didn't know that yet, or the to-be grandfather. But certainly in terms of finding anomalies, yes, big data helps. But an adversary is also aware of, the sort of investigations going on. It's really a matter of talent also. In Pittsburgh, where I work, we compete head-to-head with Google for analysts and technologists who, they could be working on cybersecurity or they could be helping sell ads for Google. Google pays a lot more. And that's really, that's a cultural decision. That's a social decision.
Just to add to it, I agree with Greg that, we've been trying to, all companies have been trying to collect more and more data for years. It's having a plan or a strategy on how to use it, right? Just collecting large amounts of data and then having to spend a lot of money to protect it. It doesn't make much sense unless you have a plan and you have the analysts, which I think I heard as of late there are 300,000 more jobs than we have people to do them. So data scientists, data analytics. I got my oldest son to do it, so he's real happy. And he has people just falling all over him trying to hire him. But yeah, so in security, that's the latest trend is to take all of that log data. So all the tools that I'm sure Greg knows a lot more than I do. We have all these tools that collect all this intelligence on our networks and anomalies on our networks and who's accessing our networks. And so you have to be able to have people who can take all of that log data, which is just, it's so big, it's actually incomprehensible, right? And then mine it in a way that they can say, why was this person accessing this database at 11:30 on a Saturday night, right? They've never done that before, and they really don't even have access to it. So it's finding those diamonds, but they have to go hand in hand. I mean, the security and the big data makes the security necessary, and in some ways you don't need as much security if you didn't have big data, right?
And our challenge with the big data is understanding what's helpful, on the law enforcement side of things. Sometimes we get stuck in the information overload. I know we've had some requirements to, hey, ask people for their log files, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. It's way too much data, but I'll take their analysis all day long. In the event, we did have one incident where a company had a ton of logs, and they decided to make it nicely formatted for us, but they put their events, 10 events per sheet on a spreadsheet all the way across to an unlimited amount of sheets. I ended up writing a macro really quickly to rip everything off. So, but it's just that information overload, understanding how it can help law enforcement, how it help us find the bad guy, and then having the manpower to go through it.
Next question.
Yes, I'm Ken Thompson. I'm an architect. A couple things. If I just turn off my home computer, is it still able to be hacked into simply by being turned off? Number two, I never did banking online. I was always afraid about these same cyber issues. Are those accounts still at risk because they've never been put on a computer somewhere, at least personally? And then finally, is there, Social Security numbers are readily available, it seems like. Is there some way you would think that you could just do a password reset and reset your Social Security? It's like, it seems so easy. Okay.
Wow, you address the technology issue.
Let's see, I'm sorry.
The computer turned on.
Yeah, the computer turned on or off. Well, if the adversary is already on your computer, then technically, yes, the adversary could turn your computer back on, and you may think it's off, but it's not off. But that's probably more of an issue for military systems than it is for your personal computer. The interesting thing, though, is if you're willing to have it off, what you're actually deciding is it's not that valuable, whatever it was doing or whatever it contains, and you're willing to kind of deny yourself access to it. So in some sense, the adversary wins if really what you're doing is worrying about the adversary in that situation. In terms of so I'll just, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the bank account, I mean, the least number of people who access it from the least number of sources, you're technically more secure. Something could still happen at the bank. Something could still happen with the vendors that you have a relationship with who may use, your check that you write. I still write checks, not always, but I still write a few. Your check is rich with your routing number, your bank account number, and your information, your name and address, and all that stuff. So I mean, it's technically a little less risky not to do internet banking.
Although I guess the counter to that, and we have had bad guys do it, is even if you're not using bank accounts, I usually personally recommend to still create that online account, because we've seen bad guys go in and find people who didn't have online accounts somehow and create their own. So instead of trying to guess your password, they already have the password because they created the account. So even online accounts you use, and at least my personal opinion is, I encourage you to create them, create a super secure password you'll never remember, just jam on the keyboard for a few minutes, and you're that much safer.
Next question.
My name is Michael Hess. I am the security team lead for the Drupal open source content management platform, which is used to power websites from whitehouse.gov to somebody's personal blog running off their computer at home. I have two questions, and I'll keep them brief. Is there something on the ISP side where people are connecting their computers to the internet that stops people from connecting compromised machines? So we see lots of compromised machines. They're fairly easy to detect, and for the most part, ISPs don't care. We should do something about that. The ISPs should be motivated to do it. It's a waste of their resources. From society's standpoint, we should do something because they become part of botnets. To one of your comments earlier, second point, from one of your comments earlier, we said that security and privacy go hand in hand. They do, but at the same time, you have companies that give you, here's our app that lets you do two-factor authentication, but at the same time you download this, we're going to download all of your contacts to our servers. We're going to take your GPS position every hour and send it to our servers, and we want all your photos sent to our server. Even though we're your bank, we don't need any of that information. We want it anyhow. So how do we balance that? Or how do companies balance that? Why do we let companies, why do the security departments inside of large companies allow their marketing groups to do that? I assume it's driven by the marketing groups.
Yeah, they can make a lot of money. I mean, if maybe you don't have your Facebook app or your LinkedIn app, or don't access CNN, or don't access any Gmail from your phone here, but I'm pretty sure that most everybody else here in the room does. And that convenience trade-off is really what it comes down to. From the ISP point of view, I know the big challenge there, it has to do with net neutrality issues. It has to do with ISPs they can't control what content there is, and that means that they don't have to control what content there is. And that's a trade-off we've made as a society. So I say talk to your legislature to put forth a new policy that is workable.
And we are about to close, and I hand this over to...
No, that was what I was going to say on net neutrality.
Let me hand this over to Emmett for closing remarks.
Wow. I hope you enjoyed today's forum. We encourage you to continue the conversation in the lobby with coffee and cookies. And remember that you can view and share all of the forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide, through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website through YouTube. Before we conclude, please help me thank our sponsor, AT&T. Go ahead and applaud. And also thank our speakers and panelists, Kirk Harith, Greg Shannon, Agent Corey Collins, and Padma Sastry. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you at CMC again. Thank you.